I was still holding the champagne flute when the email hit my inbox. Subject of a chaperoning official announcement, contract closed. $6.3 million, the biggest deal in our company's history. My deal. I stood by the window in the East Conference Room, watching Austin's skyline blink to life in the early evening, heart still thumping from the adrenaline. My team was laughing behind me, popping the second bottle of Prosecco from the office kitchen, and I could hear the sharp clink of plastic cups. Someone turned on music, some cheesy congratulations playlist. I didn't care. For once, I let myself enjoy it. It had taken me 3 months of strategy, travel, back and forth legal tweaks, and late-night calls to land this cybersecurity client. I'd led the pitch, I'd adjusted the pricing model, I'd personally negotiated the clause that finally tipped the scale, and now it was official. I closed it. Claire Monroe, Director of Strategic Growth, 38 years old, 5 years at Brabberton Tech. And still, I had to fight twice as hard to be taken seriously by leadership, especially since Mark Tiller arrived. Mark had been announced as our new CEO 6 weeks ago, 34, VC groomed, came from a failed crypto startup that no one dared call failed. He was all teeth and branding, talked in buzzwords and acted like he'd been sent to drag us out of the Stone Age. From day one, he looked through me, like I was some artifact of the old regime he couldn't wait to replace. He never said it directly. He didn't have to. His eyes did the talking. But none of that mattered now, because numbers don't lie, and $6.3 million on a single contract wasn't something even Mark could ignore. 2 hours later, he called me into his office. I didn't expect confetti, but I didn't expect a termination letter either. He gestured toward the chair. I didn't sit. Claire, he started, calm and fake sympathetic. I know today was a big day, and I want to acknowledge your contribution. Seriously, well done. I waited. My heart started to climb. He wasn't smiling, not really. That said, after reviewing our long-term roadmap and evaluating team alignment, I've made the decision to make some structural changes. Effective immediately, your position is being dissolved. I blinked. Excuse me? It's not personal. It's directional. The company is evolving, and we need people who are aligned with where we're headed. His words were polished, coached, like he was giving a keynote. You're firing me. 2 hours after I just signed the biggest contract in Braverton's history? He gave me a look that almost bordered on pity. The deal is fantastic, and we're grateful, but we've got to make tough calls right now. I stood there, stunned, searching for any sign that this was some sick power move. You've already reassigned the contract internally, haven't you? I asked. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. When I stepped out of his office, everything around me looked warped. The same hallway, the same fake ficus, the same posters about teamwork and ownership. But suddenly it all felt cheap. I walked back to my desk like I was in a dream. My nameplate was still there. I took it off and placed it in my bag without ceremony. No one said anything. Most people didn't even look up. But I felt the silence crawling on my back like wet fabric. Mark had made it clear. Claire was out. They would write a sanitized internal memo, spin some narrative about realignment and new directions, and I would be scrubbed from the company's future in the same breath they celebrated my success. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. But as I left the building, one thought looped in my head like a quiet drumbeat. He had no idea what he just did, because Mark Tiller might have fired me. But he forgot something. The deal, the $6.3 million contract, wasn't signed by Brabberton Tech. It was signed by me. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on the couch in my apartment, fully clothed, still wearing the blazer I had walked out in. I kept replaying the conversation in Mark's office, trying to understand what part of it was real. Not just the arrogance or the betrayal, but the calculated timing. He waited for me to close the deal, used me to do what no one else in the company could pull off, and then cut me loose like expired inventory. That wasn't impulsive, that was planned. He didn't care about loyalty, about merit, about what I'd built. He only cared about reshaping Braverton in his image. I was just the last obstacle. But what he didn't know, what he clearly hadn't bothered to ask legal about, was the detail that was keeping me awake. The contract. I opened my laptop and pulled up the final executed version of the agreement. I'd read it before, of course. I'd been there for every negotiation, every red line, every call with their legal team. But now, I read it like a bloodhound looking for a scent. Page 7, Section 3.2, Execution and Delivery. There it was. This agreement shall be considered binding upon the signature of Claire Monroe, representing herself as independent execution agent of Braverton Technologies, with full authority to reassign execution rights at her discretion. It was a clause I'd inserted during the third round of revisions. At the time, I'd framed it as a convenience. Our internal sign-off process was dragging. Legal delays, exec bottlenecks, risk-averse nonsense. The client Summit Shield Cybersecurity was growing impatient. Their COO had told me directly, if this drags out another week, we'll walk. I'd gone to our legal counsel, suggested the workaround. I was signed as an execution agent, technically outside normal procedure, to expedite the process. We'd formalize reassignment later. Everyone said yes because they were desperate to close, and we did, but no one, apparently not even Mark, had read the fine print. They thought it was just my name on the contract as a convenience. They didn't understand what it meant. The contract was mine to reassign, and without me involved, its terms were voidable. Morning, I had an appointment with my personal attorney, Helen Driscoll. I'd worked with Helen during a side consulting project last year, and she'd impressed me with her clean, ruthless efficiency. Her office was on the 23rd floor of a glass tower downtown, overlooking Lady Bird Lake. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. Walk me through what you want, she said, already flipping through the PDF I'd sent overnight. I want to know what I can do with this contract, I said. I signed it under this clause as execution agent. Now that I'm no longer with Braverton, can I legally extract it or redirect it? Helen frowned in that way lawyers do when they're simultaneously impressed and annoyed. You wrote this clause? Yeah. And their legal team didn't contest it? They may wanted the deal done fast. Well, she said, tapping her pen against the table, they made a very expensive mistake. I leaned forward. Explain. This clause doesn't just name you as signatory, it gives you exclusive execution rights unless otherwise reassigned. And since Braverton fired you without transferring authority or renegotiating the delivery language, technically, they're in breach. You, Claire, are the only person legally empowered to activate or continue this contract. What happens if I don't? Then Summit Shield has no obligation to proceed. In fact, they could terminate the deal, claim misrepresentation, and seek to renegotiate under different terms or with a different party. I nodded, feeling the first true flicker of power return to my chest. And if I reassign execution rights, say, to a different company, one I set up, Helen's mouth curled into a smile. Then Braverton Tech just lost their biggest deal. It was intoxicating, but I knew I had to move carefully. This wasn't about revenge for the sake of revenge. If I moved too fast or too obviously, they'd try to spin it, bury it, blame me. I needed control, and more than that, I needed leverage. That afternoon, I called Summit Shield's COO, Devin Cole. I didn't mention the termination, just said I wanted to personally thank him for the partnership and ensure a smooth transition into the onboarding phase. He was warm, casual, clearly in a good mood. Claire, we were just talking about you this morning. Honestly, we weren't sure your CEO was going to close the deal, but you made it happen. I paused. Can I ask? Would you have signed if someone else had led the negotiations? He laughed. Not a chance. We were already halfway out the door before you turned it around. If it wasn't for your flexibility on the compliance terms and your solution for the rollout timeline, we'd be with Hypervolt right now. What would happen, I said carefully, if someone else at Braverton tried to take over the relationship now? He hesitated. Why would they? This hypothetically. Honestly, he exhaled, we'd pull out. You're the reason we signed. If you're not involved, we're not comfortable. That was all I needed to hear. By that evening, I was on the Secretary of State's website registering a new entity, Monroe Strategic Solutions, LLC. I listed Helen as legal counsel. I used a small co-working space in downtown Austin as the business address. Simple, discreet, and entirely mine. I didn't go public. Not yet. I didn't send an email. I didn't post anything on LinkedIn. I let the silence grow. And as the hours passed, I imagined Mark sitting in his corner office, assuming the hard part was over, assuming the deal was secure, assuming the company had just made history on his watch. He was already crafting press releases, probably lining up podcast interviews. That's how people like him operated. They moved fast and only looked backward when someone forced them to. He hadn't forced me, he'd freed me. I was no longer an employee. I wasn't tied to their NDAs, their policies, or their chain of command. I was an independent contractor with exclusive rights to a $6.3 million contract. And I was about to pull the rug out from under him. But first, I had one more move to make. I reached out to HR. Not to complain, not to negotiate, just to ask for a copy of my personnel file and a written summary of the termination decision for my records. They sent it within the hour. Cold, impersonal. Position dissolved. Strategic misalignment. Perfect. Because in about 48 hours, Braverton Tech would learn what strategic misalignment really looks like. 2 days after I registered Monroe Strategic Solutions, I sat in my car outside Summit Shield's headquarters with a manila folder on the passenger seat. Inside was a letter drafted by Helen, notarized and clean, officially invoking Clause 3.2 of the execution agreement. In plain English, Braverton Technologies no longer had authority over the $6,300,000 0 cents contract. Effective immediately, execution rights were reassigned to Monroe Strategic Solutions. My company, my name, my terms. I wasn't naive enough to think this would go over quietly. Mark would come for blood the moment this landed. But I had spent years being careful, deliberate, professional to a fault. And now I was done playing it safe. It was time to move. I walked into Summit Shield's building like I still worked for Braverton. Security recognized me, no questions. I was the face of the deal. They remembered the negotiation visits, the catered pitch meetings, the late-night walkthroughs of infrastructure risk models. Devin Cole met me in the lobby, himself. "Claire," he said, smiling, "I didn't expect to see you in person. Everything okay?" I handed him the folder without sitting down. He flipped it open, scanned the first page, and his expression changed almost immediately. Then he looked up, blinking. "Wait, they fired you? 2 hours after we signed," I said calmly. "And they thought they could just transfer the account to someone else?" He whistled under his breath. "So, you're officially pulling the deal? I'm reassigning it to Monroe Strategic Solutions. I'd like to renegotiate some rollout language, but the core pricing and structure remains intact if you still want to work with me." Devin grinned and extended his hand. "Claire, I didn't sign with Braverton, I signed with you. Let's talk timeline." We spent the next hour mapping out the revised implementation. Devin brought in their legal counsel and compliance lead, both of whom had already reviewed the original contract. Once they saw the clause and the reassignment form, their reaction was swift. "Legally, this is airtight," their GC said. "You structured this well." "I had a feeling I might need it," I replied. The new agreement would be processed within 72 hours. Once finalized, Monroe Strategic Solutions would not only hold the contract, but become Summit Shield's primary cybersecurity consultant for the next 3 years. I walked out of that office with something far more satisfying than a win. I walked out with ownership. I didn't go home. I drove straight to Helen's office and handed her a signed copy of the new assignment. She raised her eyebrows, impressed. "You pulled it off." "They're on board, fully. The check won't clear for a few days, but I'll have the wire confirmation by Monday." "And Braverton?" "They still don't know." "You planning to tell them?" "No. I'm planning to let them figure it out the hard way." Helen smirked, then set the folder aside. "They'll come after you, Claire. Not legally. They don't have ground for that, but they'll come for your reputation. They'll start with LinkedIn, then back-channel whispers. They'll say you were unstable, emotional, impossible to manage." I nodded. "That's why I want to control the narrative." "How?" I took a breath. "I'm going to tell the truth. Clean, direct. Just enough detail to make it clear I'm not hiding, but not enough to look like I'm gloating." That night, I drafted a post. On Monday, I closed the largest contract of my career, $6.30 mums. On Tuesday, I was let go, no explanation beyond misalignment. I've spent 5 years building trust, relationships, and solutions that work. So today, I'm proud to announce the launch of Monroe Strategic Solutions. We'll be starting strong, serving as lead implementation partner for Summit Shield Cybersecurity. To those who have supported me, thank you. To those who believe I'd fade quietly, no, I won't. It wasn't bitter, it wasn't dramatic, but it lit a match. By morning, the post had over 15,000 reactions, hundreds of comments, private messages from people I hadn't heard from in years, former coworkers, clients, strangers in tech and cybersecurity, and even legal consulting. A few recruiters reached out asking if I was hiring. 3 execs from other SaaS companies wanted to grab coffee to pick my brain. The best one, though, came from within Braverton, a DM from someone in marketing. I'd worked with her briefly on the sales enablement side. Claire, you didn't hear this from me, but Mark is spiraling. The board just found out about the contract being pulled. He told them Summit Shield got cold feet. But then someone forwarded your post. Shit's about to explode. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Braverton was built on illusion. Mark thought he could rebrand, restructure, and erase anyone who didn't fit his image. He assumed clients were buying the logo, not the people behind it. He was wrong. And now, his fantasy of success, his historic deal, was dissolving before he even had time to use it as leverage for the next funding round. That afternoon, I got a call from a number I recognized, Braverton's General Counsel, Amanda Rhodes. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was polite but firm. Hi, Claire. I'd like to speak with you regarding the recent developments with Summit Shield. We have some questions about contract ownership and client engagement terms. Please call me back at your earliest convenience. I never did. The next call came from Mark himself. Unknown number, I answered. There, hey, it's Mark. Look, I think we had a miscommunication. I want to talk about the transition. I think maybe things moved too fast on both sides. No, Mark. Things moved exactly the way you wanted them to. You're upset. I get that. But you're putting the company in a tough position. We had plans built around that revenue. You should have read the contract. A long pause. Then, you manipulated it. No, Barry, I protected my work and you treated me like I was disposable. Another pause. You're making a big mistake. Burning bridges like this industry talks. I know it does, I said. That's why I posted what I did, and judging by the response, I'm not the one on fire. I hung up. And then, I exhaled. For the first time in months, maybe longer, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. Not on someone else's platform, not climbing someone else's ladder. Mine, built from the ashes of someone else's arrogance. The next morning, I met with Helen again. She handed me a folder with all the final documents. Incorporation, contract assignments, banking setup. Monroe Strategic Solutions was officially operational. I wasn't just self-employed. I was leading. And the foundation wasn't theory or pitch decks. It was revenue, results, and reputation. And Mark was just now realizing he hadn't fired an employee. He had fired the deal itself. By the end of the week, the name Monroe Strategic Solutions was echoing far beyond anything I had anticipated. The LinkedIn post kept snowballing, picked up by a few industry newsletters, then reshared by tech influencers I didn't even follow. Somewhere along the way, it stopped being a former employee speaks out story and became a case study in what people were calling executive arrogance. The comments section read like a courtroom, dozens of voices chiming in not just to support me, but to speak about their own versions of the same experience, overworked, overlooked, discarded the minute their usefulness ran out. The story resonated far beyond me, but I hadn't told the full story. Not yet. I spent most of my days fielding messages, finalizing the transition with Summit Shield, hiring a freelance developer to build a website, and holding onboarding calls with their team. I worked off a laptop at my kitchen table, sipping reheated coffee and using my hallway mirror as the background for Zoom calls. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Every minute of my day now served my vision, not someone else's bottom line. And the more I built, the more the anger I'd felt in Mark's office was replaced by something else. Purpose. On Thursday morning, I received a text from Valerie, one of the senior analysts still at Braverton. We'd worked together for years, and I knew she'd been hesitant about the new direction the company was taking under Mark. I hadn't expected to hear from her. Can we talk? Not over text. We met at a quiet cafe on the east side, one of those places with too many plants and overpriced pastries. She looked tired, not physically, but soul tired. The kind of exhaustion that settles into your voice when you've stayed somewhere too long out of fear. I'm leaving, she said. No small talk. I can't keep pretending this place is what it used to be. Everyone's miserable. Half the deals you built are crumbling. Mark replaced your entire sales process with some startup automation tool no one understands. Clients are pulling out left and right, and internally the vibe is... She trailed off, shaking her head. People are scared to speak up. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it. Because I knew what Braverton had been, and now it was something else entirely. There's more, Valerie said, lowering her voice. I saw an internal memo yesterday. Mark's trying to pitch a revised version of your Summit Shield deal to the board, as if it's still alive. He's claiming the client paused rollout due to internal reasons. He hasn't told them the contract is gone. My stomach turned, not from shock, but from recognition. Of course he was lying. He was too arrogant to admit what he'd lost, too proud to tell the truth. But he wasn't just misleading the board now, he was building a narrative. One where I was the unstable rogue operator who hijacked a deal out of spite. I needed to get ahead of this. That afternoon, I called Devin at Summit Shield. Would you be open, I asked, to a joint statement about the reassignment? Not to stir anything, just to make the record clear. He didn't hesitate. Absolutely. You saved this deal, you deserve the credit. Within 24 hours, the press release was live, simple, professional, unmistakably clear. Summit Shield Cybersecurity is proud to partner with Monroe Strategic Solutions in the execution of a multi-year $6,300,000 0-cents agreement originally negotiated by Claire Monroe prior to her transition from Braverton Technologies. We look forward to working closely with Claire and her team to implement customized security solutions across our national infrastructure. It was featured on 2 business tech blogs and reposted by Summit Shield's own communications team. There was no malice in it, no mention of being fired, no name-dropping of Braverton's CEO, but the message couldn't have been louder. That evening, Helen called. You're making enemies, she said, powerful ones. I'm not attacking anyone, I replied. I'm just not letting them rewrite my story. I'll try anyway. Are you ready for that? I don't need to be ready, I said. I just need to stay visible. The next day I made a second post. Shorter than the first, no emotional language, no commentary, just the link to the press release, followed by a single line. Proud to begin this chapter with integrity. If the first post sparked a conversation, the second one detonated a movement. My inbox exploded. A mid-sized fintech company in Chicago reached out, saying they'd been following my story and were unhappy with their current vendor. A VC partner who'd previously dismissed my leadership potential offered to grab coffee and explore synergies. 2 former Braverton clients sent messages hinting at upcoming needs. It was more than buzz, it was momentum. Real, tangible, forward motion. 3 days later, Valerie resigned. She joined Monroe Strategic Solutions as our Director of Client Strategy. But we didn't even have office space yet. I hired 2 more people within the week, 1 former Braverton engineer and 1 operations coordinator from a startup I'd helped consult 2 years earlier. Each of them brought a story. Each of them wanted not just a job, but a place to belong again. That mattered to me. I wasn't just building a company, I was building the workplace I wished I'd had. Then came the real test. An email from a private Gmail account. No name. Just the subject line. You should see this. Attached was a PDF, an internal Braverton memo, clearly leaked by someone still inside. In it, Mark outlined a plan to restructure leadership messaging and regain narrative control. The tone was insidious. He blamed rogue elements and unauthorized brand representation, all without using my name, but the implications were obvious. He was trying to position me as unstable, a liability, a woman who had, in his words, acted emotionally during a standard personnel transition. The same man who fired me after using my work to boost his status now wanted to brand me as irrational for not going quietly. I stared at the memo for a long time. My first instinct was rage, then disbelief, then something colder. I didn't respond to it, I didn't post about it, I didn't need to. Instead, I sent out a job list. Monroe Strategic Solutions is expanding, seeking professionals who believe competence should never be erased by ego. It wasn't a takedown, that was an invitation. And it was. In 2 weeks, I had over 120 applications, most from women, most from people who had left jobs not because they weren't good at what they did, but because someone else had made them feel small. Braverton was still pretending they were thriving, but I didn't have to pretend anything. I had client, I had revenue, I had a team that trusted me, and look, he was stuck rewriting my history in the dark. Because out here in the open, I'd already started writing something new. The email came in at 6:42 p.m. on a Friday, just as I was locking up the temporary co-working office we were using. Subject line, request to discuss reconciliation. The sender was Mark Tiller. My first instinct was to delete it, but then I opened it, curiosity overruling every ounce of self-preservation I had cultivated in the last few weeks. The body of the message was short, cold, professional, and wildly out of touch. Clea, let's connect for coffee next week. I believe there's still value in finding a mutually beneficial path forward. We've both built something impressive. No reason we can't realign. Realign, he was still using that word like this was some miscommunication that could be cleared up over lattes and LinkedIn speak. I didn't reply that night. I sat in my car, staring at the screen, listening to the faint hum of traffic and thinking about how cleanly he'd tried to erase me and how quickly he now wanted to reintroduce me into the fold. Not as an equal, of course, as a tool. Helen advised caution. Go, she said, but record it. And don't agree to anything. Men like this don't apologize, they reposition. I met Mark 3 days later in a hotel lounge he chose, one of those polished, neutral spaces that rich people used for secret meetings. He arrived first, wearing a blazer too tight across the chest and a smile too rehearsed to be real. I recognized it immediately. The same smile he wore the day he fired me. Claire, he said, standing to shake my hand. Thanks for coming. I had a gap in my calendar, I replied, keeping my tone as even as my face. We sat. A waiter brought water. Mark skipped the small talk. I'll get to the point, he said. We both know what happened was messy, and I take partial responsibility for that. There were miscommunications on both sides, emotions, missteps. I raised an eyebrow. You fired me 2 hours after I closed your biggest deal. That wasn't a misstep. That was strategy. He ignored it. The reality is, we need to move forward, and frankly, the press has created a narrative that doesn't serve either of us. You look like someone acting out of emotion. I look like a villain. Neither are accurate. You lied to your board, I said. You told them the deal was still active after it had been reassigned. That wasn't a narrative. That was your cover. He exhaled through his nose like I had said something mildly offensive but not quite worth arguing. Look, Claire, here's what I'm proposing. Come back in a limited capacity. Consultant. Optics matter. If we show some collaboration, the dust settles. We control the narrative. You get a nice contract. We get stability. It's a win-win. I leaned back in my chair and smiled. I reached in my bag and placed a small object on the table. A voice recorder. Already blinking red, his face tightened. This is legal in Texas, I said. One-party consent, just in case you were wondering. He didn't respond. Mark, I'm not interested in optics. I'm interested in consequences. You used me. You lied, you tried to bury me, and now that the board's breathing down your neck, you want me to put a Band-Aid on the open wound you created. His tone shifted. The smoothness cracked. You're overplaying your hand. You had one win. It's not sustainable. You're a boutique consultant with one big name. That kind of model doesn't scale. You think you're building an empire, Claire? You're building a story. and stories fade. I reached for my water and took a slow sip. You're right, stories fade, but receipts don't. And with that, I stood, dropped a 20 on the table, and left him sitting there, with his smugness slipping into panic. That evening, I sent the reporting to Helen and saved a copy on 3 separate encrypted drives. I didn't plan to release it, not yet, but it was ammunition, evidence that everything I had suspected about Mark's manipulation was true. He didn't care about collaboration, he cared about survival. On Monday, I received confirmation that Summit Shield had wired the second installment of our contract, $1,850,000, 0 cents. 2 days later, another former Braverton client, Midline Systems, reached out directly, saying they wanted to explore transitioning their services to Monroe Strategic Solutions. Their contact, Valerie, who had stayed in touch with a few quiet allies inside Braverton. Bittlebird. And then came the message that made me stop cold. A LinkedIn request. From Mark. No message attached, just a request to connect. I stared at it for a full minute, then clicked ignore. Instead, I wrote a new post. I've received a lot of questions lately about whether success after being pushed out is possible. I don't have a formula, just this. Document everything. Protect your name, and when they ask you to come back, ask yourself, would you trust someone who tried to erase you? The post went viral. Again. 3 hours later, Valerie messaged me. He's panicking. HR just held a closed-door meeting. Legal is reviewing all terminations from the last year. They're trying to get ahead of something. I didn't respond. But I knew what that meant. The board wasn't just annoyed anymore. They were scared. And they should be. Because a CEO can survive bad press, but not lawsuits, not fraud, and certainly not a pattern of behavior that costs them millions. By the end of that week, we closed another contract. I hired 2 more people. We moved out of the co-working space and into a small office downtown. Mark, meanwhile, was sending frantic emails to contacts we had in common, trying to frame the situation as a mutual misunderstanding and a lesson in leadership evolution. It was pathetic. And somewhere in the middle of all that noise, I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. It wasn't even trying to prove anything. I was building something real. And no matter how many press releases Mark wrote or coffee invitations he sent, he couldn't touch that anymore. Because this wasn't about revenge. It was about clarity, and he was finally beginning to see me clearly. The day we moved into our first real office, it rained. Not the light, cinematic drizzle that gently mists glass and makes everything look meaningful. No, it was a full-blown Texas downpour. Sheets of rain came down hard against the windows as I stood in the middle of the unfurnished space, soaked from unloading boxes out of my trunk. Valerie walked in behind me, holding 2 cups of coffee like trophies. "Well," she said, shaking water from her jacket, "if this isn't poetic rebirth, I don't know what is." We both laughed, standing there in puddles on the concrete floor, surrounded by folding tables, chairs we'd ordered secondhand, and cables we hadn't figured out how to organize yet. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. Monroe Strategic Solutions finally had a home, and within its walls were the beginning threads of something undeniable. Clients were coming in faster than I had projected. Word spread quickly in our industry when a company could deliver not just results, but stability. We weren't the biggest, but we didn't make promises we couldn't keep. Midline Systems signed on for a 12-month engagement. Then came Blue Cove Analytics, a smaller but well-connected financial tech firm whose VP had reached out personally, citing my LinkedIn post as what had pushed her to reconsider her existing bent. "It was like you said, what all of us were thinking," she told me, like someone finally said it out loud. That struck me. It wasn't just that I had been fired unfairly or that I had taken control of the contract Mark assumed he owned. It was that I had broken the silence, spoken where others had swallowed their anger, told the truth without bitterness. That truth had rippled out like a wave, small at first, then gaining strength, and in its path, people were gravitating towards something that felt authentic. But behind the scenes, Braverton was bleeding. I didn't need Valerie's updates to confirm that anymore. Clients were jumping ship, recruitment had slowed, and internal morale, from what I gathered through whispers, was nearing collapse. A week after our office move-in, I received an anonymous envelope, no return address. Inside were printed pages, screenshots of emails, and internal Slack messages from Braverton's leadership team. Some of it was predictable: desperation over declining revenue, panicked marketing drafts trying to spin the narrative, even a few half-baked rebranding proposals. But one message stood out. It was from Mark to the board of directors, dated 2 days after our coffee meeting. It read, "Claire's momentum will fade. She doesn't have the infrastructure. We can still salvage our position if we maintain pressure. A coordinated response is being developed." That was all I needed to see. And he wasn't done trying to destroy what I'd built. He just shifted strategies. I showed the memo to Helen, who skimmed it and sighed. If he's attempting to interfere with client relationships or using company funds to orchestrate a defamation strategy, the board's going to be forced to act, especially now that it's documented. "You think they'll do anything?" I asked. "If this many clients are already gone and they're still backing him?" Helen leaned back in her chair, hands clasped. "Boards don't act out of morality. They act out of fear. Give them a reason to be afraid, and yes, they'll act." So I gave them one. That week, I accepted an invitation to speak at the Austin Tech Leadership Summit. It wasn't something I would have considered a year ago, but now the timing was perfect. The theme was sustainable scale, and the organizer asked if I could share my journey from corporate leadership to independent founder. I agreed, with one condition: I wanted it recorded and shared publicly. I stood on stage in front of 300 people, executives, investors, founders, recruiters, and told my story. I didn't name Mark. I didn't even name Braverton, but I painted the picture so clearly that anyone paying attention could read between the lines. I spoke about what it means to be silenced in the room you helped build, what it means to be used, discarded, and expected to disappear, and what it means to not only survive that, but rise from it. My voice didn't shake, my hands didn't tremble, and when I finished, there was a moment of stillness, followed by applause that didn't feel polite, it felt furious. Like the audience wasn't just clapping for me, but for every time they'd bitten their own tongues in the face of the same pattern. The video went viral within days. I didn't post it first, someone in the audience did. Then a business blog picked it up, then another. Suddenly, I was being quoted in conversations about toxic leadership, accountability, and workplace power dynamics. And right there, embedded in every one of those stories, was the line they couldn't ignore. "He thought I was gone. All he did was unleash me." 2 days after the video crossed 500,000 views, Helen called me. "You might want to sit down." "Why?" I asked, although I already knew. Braverton just filed an emergency board session. Internal leaks suggest Mark's on the chopping block. They're trying to limit liability exposure. Apparently, a few investors saw your talk and the memo. I felt the silence in the air, like a weight being lifted. Not because I needed revenge, not because I wanted him fired, but because the truth had finally pierced the glass walls that had protected him for so long. And because I had gotten here without lowering myself to his level. No tricks, no counter lies, just truth and execution. I didn't celebrate. I went into work the next day and started answering emails like always. We had 2 more clients in the pipeline. Valerie was finalizing budgets. I was reviewing a potential acquisition of a smaller competitor whose founder had reached out to ask if we'd be interested in taking over their contracts. Things were growing faster than I could have imagined. Late that afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from a Braverton employee I didn't know personally. Just a single sentence. And foul. I didn't reply, I didn't screenshot it, I just closed the message and kept typing my email draft. Because the empire that tried to erase me was gone, and the one they accidentally helped me build was only just beginning. 6 months later, the world had changed. At least, my world had. Monroe Strategic Solutions had outgrown its modest downtown office and moved into a larger space on the 11th floor of a building that overlooked the same skyline I used to stare at from Braverton's East Conference Room. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't even about proving a point. The noise had faded, the press had moved on, but we hadn't. We'd scaled, we'd delivered, we'd built something real. The kind of company I'd always believed was possible, but had never been allowed to create. We had 16 full-time employees, a wait list of clients, and a retention rate most agencies would kill for. Our monthly numbers weren't just healthy, they were dominant. But the part that mattered more was what I saw every day. People working without fear, collaborating without backstabbing, and growing without having to look over their shoulder. It was what I'd fought for, even when I didn't have the words to explain why. Mark, on the other hand, had vanished. After the board removed him, Braverton issued a statement so sterile it felt algorithmic. Leadership transition, gratitude for contributions, realignment with core values, standard damage control. Then he disappeared from public view entirely. His LinkedIn went dark. The rumors said he was consulting in private equity now, far away from anything that involved internal org charts or clients with a memory. A few people told me he'd been trying to raise money for a new startup, but no one was investing. Apparently his name didn't carry the same weight it once did, or maybe the weight it carried now was the wrong kind. One afternoon in early spring, I received a letter, a real one. Thick envelope, expensive stock, no return address. Inside was a single-page printout from Braverton's legal department. A formal notification that they had fully relinquished all claims and interests pertaining to the original Summit Shield contract and all related extensions or subcontracts, including but not limited to those executed under Monroe Strategic Solutions. There was no explanation, no note of apology, no attempt at goodwill, just a clean line drawn in legal language. It was, in its own way, a white flag. I scanned it into our archive and slid the paper into the bottom drawer of my desk, beneath the folder where I kept my original termination letter. The irony wasn't lost on me. That weekend, I spoke at a university entrepreneurship panel. The room was full of students with restless eyes and big dreams. One of them asked, "What's the best advice you ever ignored?" I didn't hesitate. "That silence is the high road," I said. Sometimes the high road is just the one that keeps you quiet while someone else rewrites your story. After the panel, a young woman came up to me. She looked familiar, though I couldn't place her. "You probably don't remember me," she said. "I was an intern at Braverton. You helped me rewrite my resume once when I was too scared to ask my manager. You didn't have to do that." I smiled. "I remember." "I work at a different firm now," she said, "but I still tell people about what you did, not just the Braverton story, all of it. That you stood up, that you didn't flinch. It made people believe we could too." Later that night, alone in the office, I sat by the window and looked out at the city. It didn't feel like revenge anymore. It felt like restoration. Like I had found the version of myself I'd once tried to become inside someone else's structure and finally built her a home of her own. The betrayal, the firing, the chaos, it hadn't broken me. It had uncovered me. All the noise Mark tried to bury me under had become the drumbeat I walked to now. Louder, stronger. And when I opened my email that evening and saw another request to connect from Mark, his name appearing again like a ghost looking for an open door, I didn't feel anything at all. Not anger, not spite, not satisfaction. I just hit ignore and got back to work.